Good evening all and welcome back to Spirits of Sites. The ocean covers more than 70% of our planet, yet most of it remains a dark, silent world we can barely imagine. Beneath the waves lie secrets older than humanity, sounds that shouldn't exist, lights that defy explanation, vessels that shouldn't move, and melodies that reach into your mind. Tonight we descend into the abyss, where reality twists and the unknown waits patiently in the black. In this video, we bring you 5 chilling true accounts from the deepest, most mysterious corners of the ocean. The unsettling pulse of the Bloop, the inexplicable tapping of the phantom knock, disappearing lights that defy explanation, the living wreck that seems almost alive, and the haunting song of the Abyssal Siren. If you dare to explore these mysteries with us, make sure to hit that subscribe button and leave a comment sharing which story chills you the most. Your thoughts might just echo in the abyss. Prepare yourself. The ocean is listening, and once you enter its depths, there's no turning back. Do you dare imagine what might be hiding miles beneath the waves? In 1997, scientists recorded a sound so powerful it shook the ocean. They called it the Bloop. But here, the terrifying part, no one could say what made it. Could it have been the cracking of an iceberg, or was it something far more sinister, something alive, vast enough to be heard across continents? For decades, people have whispered that the Bloop was the ocean's way of warning us we are not alone down there. And whatever waits in the deep is beyond anything we can understand. The story begins not with a diver, not with a ship, but with a machine. Far below the waves, thousands of miles apart, the United States Navy had deployed a network of hydrophones, sensitive underwater microphones, designed during the Cold War. Their original purpose was to listen for submarines, hidden under the pressure of the ocean, sneaking silently across the globe. These microphones were powerful enough to pick up the hum of propellers, the faint scrape of metal, even the low rumble of underwater eruptions. By the late 1990s, however, many of these hydrophones had been repurposed for science. Researchers at the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, NOAA, used them to study whales, seismic activity, and the hidden geology of the ocean floor. And then something happened. On a summer day in 1997, the hydrophones began to record a sound unlike anything they had ever encountered before. It was low, impossibly low, vibrating through the very bones of the sea. It lasted for just over a minute, long enough to study, but short enough to leave everyone unsettled. It wasn't static. It wasn't random. It was alive with strange energy, like the bellow of something impossibly vast. They named it almost jokingly the Bloop. But there was nothing funny about what they had heard. To understand the scale of the Bloop, you need to understand how sound works underwater. In the air, sound travels fast. But in the dense, cold layers of the deep ocean, sound travels even faster and farther. A whale song can carry for hundreds of miles. But the Bloop was heard across 3,000 miles of ocean. Hydrophones placed thousands of kilometers apart all picked up the exact same sound at the same time. That meant only one thing: whatever made it was enormous. Scientists used to cataloging whale calls and seismic groans were suddenly confronted with something that didn't match any known species, any known natural event. Some of the first people to hear it said it sounded like a deep roar, rising in pitch, like something massive awakening in the abyss. And because the human mind seeks answers, speculation began to bloom. At first, scientists tried to stay grounded. They suggested it might have been geological activity, the grinding of tectonic plates, the crack of volcanic activity, or the calving of an iceberg. Ice quakes, when enormous sheets of ice shear and break, do make loud sounds. But the issue was scale. The Bloop was too loud. Louder than any whale. Louder than any natural iceberg crack ever recorded. And when something doesn't fit, the mind drifts elsewhere. What if it wasn't ice at all? What if something alive, something massive beyond comprehension had made that sound? Writers, journalists, and eventually online communities seized upon the mystery. Theories began to multiply. Was it a giant squid, a prehistoric beast hidden for millions of years beneath the crushing pressure of the abyss? Or was it something far worse, something drawn from the pages of horror itself? It didn't take long before fans of horror fiction linked the Bloop to the works of H. Lovecraft. In Lovecraft's mythology, there exists an ancient being named Cthulhu. a monstrous sleeping god that rests in the ruins of the city of Arlae, deep beneath the Pacific Ocean. And where was the Bloop recorded? Near the South Pacific, not far from the exact coordinates Lovecraft described for Arlae in his 1928 story, The Call of Cthulhu. The coincidence was too tantalizing for people to ignore. The Bloop was described as a vast, unnatural roar from the abyss. Lovecraft's creature was said to be so large it defied human imagination. The overlap was chilling. Suddenly, the Bloop wasn't just a scientific anomaly. It was a glimpse into cosmic horror. Proof some believed that fiction was closer to fact than anyone dared admit. Why did the idea take such a hold? Because the ocean is the perfect place to hide monsters. Think about it, we've mapped more of the surface of Mars than the ocean floor. Over 80% of the deep sea remains unexplored. At depths where pressure could crush steel, where no light has ever reached, who can truly say what lurks there? When even whales can slip into the dark unnoticed, when colossal squids were only confirmed within the last 2 decades, is it so impossible that something larger, older, and stranger could dwell in the blackness? The Bloop reminded us of this horrifying truth: we don't know our own planet. And sometimes the planet speaks back. Years later, NOAA released an official explanation. They concluded that the Bloop was caused by an icequake, the cracking and fracturing of a massive Antarctic iceberg. The sound matched patterns of ice movement, they said. Case closed. Or was it? Skeptics point out that the Bloop was far louder than other recorded icequakes. Louder even than the most catastrophic iceberg events studied since. And while the pattern may resemble ice, the sheer power of the sound remains unmatched. In other words, while the explanation fits on paper, it doesn't feel complete. The Bloop has become one of those mysteries that, even with an answer, refuses to die. Let's pause for a moment. Imagine being in a submarine miles below the surface, surrounded by metal walls thinner than your arm. Imagine silence all around you, until suddenly, the hull begins to vibrate with a sound like nothing you've ever heard. What would your mind do? Would you think of ice, of geology? Or would you imagine in the pitch black that something was out there, something enormous, circling your fragile vessel in the dark? This is the psychological terror of the Bloop. Even if it was only ice, the idea that such a sound can ripple through the ocean, touch hydrophones thousands of miles apart, and leave us trembling on the surface speaks to how fragile we are in the face of the deep. Some refuse to accept NOAA's explanation. Conspiracy theories claim the government knows more. That the Bloop was the first recording of a deep-sea creature, and officials chose to dismiss it to avoid panic. Others go further, that the Bloop was evidence of human activity, a secret military project, or even an attempt to mask something happening beneath the sea. Whatever the truth, the fact that the sound has not been recorded again fuels suspicion. Was it a one-time event, or was it silenced? Today, the Bloop remains one of the internet's most enduring ocean mysteries. It appears in documentaries, novels, horror podcasts, and countless YouTube videos. It has inspired stories of deep-sea monsters, films about ancient leviathans, and even video games that imagine colossal beings lurking under the waves. But beyond the fiction, the Bloop serves as a reminder of something very real. We don't know what's down there. Every strange sound, every unexplained flicker of light in the abyss, every phantom knock on the hull of a submarine, these are the whispers of a world we can't see. A world where our technology struggles to survive, where human beings are fragile intruders in a hostile kingdom. In 1997, a sound echoed across the Pacific. A sound louder than any whale, stranger than any earthquake. Scientists called it the Bloop. They told us it was ice. But here's the truth: the ocean doesn't give up its secrets so easily. For every explanation, there is a shadow of doubt. For every theory, there is a darker possibility. And as long as the ocean remains largely unexplored, the Bloop will echo in our imaginations, not just as a sound, but as a warning. Because somewhere out there, beneath 7 miles of crushing pressure and eternal darkness, something may still be moving. Something vast, something alive, and one day it might not just roar. It might rise. Imagine being miles beneath the surface, encased in a metal shell, when something begins to tap against the hull. Rhythmic, persistent, a sound that has no business being there. No creature, no machine, no explanation. Just the ocean's crushing silence, interrupted by the impossible. This is the story of the Phantom Knock, one of the most unsettling mysteries reported by deep-sea explorers. Submersibles are often described as coffins of steel. They're cramped, dark, and designed to endure pressures that would turn a human into pulp in seconds. Imagine squeezing into one with 2 or 3 other people, sealed shut, and then sinking into a world without light. The further you descend, the more the ocean changes. The sunlight fades until it's gone completely, replaced by an eternal midnight. Temperatures drop, the hull creaks under the weight of millions of gallons of water pressing in from all sides. Your breath fogs the glass viewport, and the only sounds are the hum of the life support systems, the faint static of the comms, and the creaks and groans of the submersible itself adjusting to crushing pressures. For the crew, nerves are already strained. You're in an alien world where any malfunction could mean a quick, silent death. It's in this fragile state of mind that the knock was first heard. The story comes from a respected submersible pilot, someone with thousands of hours of deep-sea experience. He wasn't a rookie. He had seen giant squids flash their tentacles against the glass. He had navigated trenches so deep they looked endless. He wasn't a man to frighten easily. But even he admitted that what happened that day left him shaken. At about 3,000 meters down, the sub was hovering near a ridge, surveying unusual rock formations. The silence was almost hypnotic, broken only by the occasional crackle of sonar. Then it came, knock, a single sharp sound. At first, the crew thought it was nothing more than the hull groaning under pressure. Submariners are used to this. But then it came again. Nug, 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 rhythmic, deliberate, like knuckles rapping against a door. The pilot paused. The other crew members exchanged uneasy looks. Hull pressure doesn't knock like that, nor does shifting rock. This was patterned, controlled, almost intelligent. The crew scrambled to check instruments. Sonar was clear, no approaching submersibles, no geological shifts that could explain it. They flicked on the exterior floodlights, but the beams dissolved into blackness, illuminating nothing but drifting silt. Then, just as their nerves began to settle, knock. Nug, 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 this time louder, closer. It seemed to be traveling along the hull, as though something outside was circling them, tapping its presence like a warning or a taunt. Panic crept in. The abyss is absolute. At that depth, no diver could survive outside. No other known submersible was in the area. No animal, as far as science knew, could create such a sound, not rhythmic, not metallic, not purposeful. And yet the knocking persisted. Inside the tiny chamber, the air grew thick with dread. Humans aren't meant to be in places like this. Every instinct screams to flee, but there is nowhere to go. Outside is instant death, inside is claustrophobic, suffocating. The pilot later said it felt like being inside a haunted house, only this house was surrounded by miles of crushing black water. The hull became the thin barrier between life and whatever was out there. Crew members began to whisper theories. Could it be a colossal squid, curious and brushing its beak against the metal? Could shifting rocks along the trench wall be striking the hull in rhythm? Or, and no one wanted to say it, could it be something alive, intelligent, and utterly unknown? The ocean's silence gave no answer. The tapping grew more erratic, sometimes fast, sometimes slow. At one point, it mimicked the exact rhythm one of the crew members nervously tapped on his chair, as if something outside was responding. Every light, every system inside the sub hummed normally. Nothing was malfunctioning. The only abnormal thing was the knocking, echoing through their steel prison like a heartbeat that wasn't their own. The pilot made the call to ascend. Whatever was happening, they needed to leave. The crew didn't argue. As the sub rose, the knocking followed. Not constantly, but in bursts, as if whatever it was didn't want them to leave. Finally, around 1,500 meters, the knocking ceased. Silence returned. The sub surfaced without incident. But the crew was changed. Each of them swore they had heard the sound. Each of them swore it was deliberate. Yet when they reported the incident, the official explanation was simple: hull stress noises. Nothing unusual. But the pilot never accepted that. He knew the difference between the groan of a stressed hull and the sound of someone, or something, knocking to be let in. The phantom knock has since become a whispered legend in the deep-sea community. A story told quietly among pilots, divers, and researchers, always with the same haunted look in their eyes. Some say it was a giant squid, but squids don't knock on steel. Others think it was geological, but no known rockfall creates perfectly timed, rhythmic sounds. And then there are the darker theories. That something vast and intelligent lives in the trenches. Something curious enough to tap on the alien intruder in its domain. That the ocean itself, with its crushing pressure and shifting magnetic fields, can play tricks on the mind, creating auditory hallucinations. Or, and this is the most chilling, that the knocking was a communication attempt. A message, a warning. No one knows. No one ever will. What makes the phantom knock so terrifying is its simplicity. Unlike blurry photographs of sea monsters or vague sonar readings, this was sound. Clear, undeniable, heard by multiple people at once. A knock is universal. It's human. It's what you do when you want someone to answer the door. That's what chills people most about this story. Because if something was knocking, then something was out there in the black, and it wanted to be heard. To this day, deep-sea pilots speak of strange sounds. Of raps, clicks, or even voices picked up on hydrophones. Most are dismissed as whales or geological noise. But once in a while, a veteran will tell you about a time they heard something they can't explain. And they'll fall silent, eyes distant, as if remembering the sound of someone knocking from the wrong side of the door. The ocean is often called Earth's final frontier. But maybe it's more than that. Maybe it's a barrier, a border between our world and something else. Something ancient, something patient. And sometimes when we dare to descend into its darkness, it knocks, just to remind us it's still there, waiting. Do you dare imagine what it's like to stare into absolute darkness, and then see lights appear where no lights should be? Strange, shifting patterns glowing deep in the abyss, moving like signals, like a language not meant for us. What if the ocean itself is trying to communicate or warn us? This is the story of the disappearing lights, a mystery witnessed by crews in the world's deepest submersible expeditions. Every journey into the deep begins the same way, with silence. The submersible is lowered into the water, its metal body groaning as it adjusts to the surrounding pressure. Sunlight filters faintly through the surface at first, pale, bluish shafts that ripple and fade. But with each 100 meters, the light dims. By 200 meters, the water is twilight. By 500, the light is gone. Past 1,000 meters, you enter a world where sunlight has never reached. Eternal midnight. The only glow comes from your instruments and the faint gleam of your own floodlights piercing a few feet into the black. Yet strangely, this world is alive with light. The deep ocean is filled with bioluminescent creatures, tiny sparks like stars, drifting across your viewport. Fish flicker like neon signs, jellyfish pulse with ghostly glows, and predators flash deadly lures to draw in prey. It's breathtaking, surreal, almost comforting. But not all the lights in the deep belong to living things we understand. Sometimes explorers witness patterns, lights that appear where no creature should be. And sometimes they vanish in ways that feel deliberate. The earliest whispers of vanishing lights began in the late 1970s. A Japanese research submersible descended into the Izubanan Trench, scanning the seabed for geological activity. At around 4,000 meters, the crew saw something they couldn't explain. A line of lights. Not scattered plankton, not drifting organisms, but perfectly aligned points of glow, stretching across the trench floor like a runway into the abyss. At first, the pilot thought it must be equipment, a trail of discarded lamps, maybe the wreckage of a vessel with still active electronics. But as they steered closer, the lights did something no debris could do. They vanished, not faded, not dimmed. They snapped out all at once, leaving behind nothing but black water and silence. The crew argued. One insisted it must have been bioluminescent squid. Another swore it looked mechanical. The pilot said nothing, but he couldn't shake the feeling that the lights hadn't disappeared randomly. They had disappeared because they'd been noticed. A decade later, in the 1980s, an American submersible operating in the Puerto Rico Trench reported a far stranger encounter. The crew saw glowing orbs drifting just outside the range of their lights. Not unusual at first, until they realized the orbs were keeping pace with the sub. Every turn, every change in depth, the lights adjusted. At first, they were dismissed as plankton or schools of jellyfish disturbed by the craft's movement. But when the pilot dimmed the floodlights, the orbs brightened. When the lights flared again, the orbs dimmed. Almost like a game. Almost like mimicry. And then, as the submersible attempted to capture footage, the cameras malfunctioned. Static filled the screens. The recording was useless. When the lights returned to the viewports, they hovered for just a moment longer and then blinked out. The pilot, a hardened veteran of multiple dives, admitted later that he had never felt so watched in his life. Perhaps the most chilling account came in 1993 during an Atlantic dive. The crew of a research submersible saw 4 lights appear in the distance. They pulsed in unison, then paused. Then 3 lights. Then a long pause. Then 4 again. The pattern repeated. It wasn't random. It wasn't drifting organisms. It was a sequence. The pilot described it in his log. 4. Pause. 3. Long pause. 4 again. Always the same. Always waiting for us to notice. It felt like watching a language, a message broadcast into the dark. But it wasn't meant for us. At least I hope it was. When they attempted to approach, the lights winked out instantly. Sonar registered movement, something vast shifting away into the trench, too large and too slow to be any known creature. The pilot retired shortly after that dive. He refused to speak of the event again. In 2007, a deep-sea mining submersible encountered a far more sinister version of the phenomenon. At 3,500 meters, the crew noticed spirals of glowing dots twisting in the blackness. Like a helix of light turning slowly, beckoning them forward. Curious, they steered closer. The spiral widened, pulling them into its center. For 10 minutes, the crew sat mesmerized by the dance of lights, until suddenly every one of them went out. Darkness, absolute. At that exact moment, the subsystems began to flicker. Lights inside dimmed. Instrument panels glitched. One crew member screamed he could hear something moving outside, scraping softly against the hull. Another swore he saw a pale face in the viewport, vanishing when the emergency lights came back on. They aborted the dive immediately. On review, the black box recorded no electrical failure. The systems had been fine, which meant the malfunctions, the flickering, the noises, all of it came from somewhere else. Veterans of deep-sea exploration often describe the same sensation, being watched. Not by a single creature, not by predators, but by something vast, unseen, just beyond the glow of the submersible. The vanishing lights feed that fear. When lights appear in patterns, spirals, grids, signals, they give the unsettling impression of intelligence. One diver confessed, "I can handle the dark. I can handle the pressure. What I can't handle is when the ocean starts talking back." Some pilots refuse to speak of the vanishing lights at all. To them, talking about it makes it real. Scientists and institutions provide explanations, of course. They have to. The alternatives are too terrifying. Bioluminescent schools. Squid, fish, plankton all glowing together. But how do they form perfect spirals, runways, grids, electromagnetic disturbances? Submersibles create strong magnetic fields. Could these trigger bioluminescent organisms to flare in strange ways? Possible, but why the vanishing? Why the mimicry, hallucination? Stress, low oxygen, extreme isolation. Crews may imagine what they want or fear to see. But when entire crews report the same thing across decades and oceans, hallucination becomes a flimsy excuse. Something else. This is the theory no one wants to say out loud. That the lights are not creatures at all, but signals. Warnings, or perhaps lures. Imagine being in that steel coffin, 3 miles beneath the waves. You've seen nothing for hours but dark water, drifting plankton, and the occasional flicker of bioluminescence. Then suddenly you see patterns. Rows, spirals, grids. At first your heart leaps. Discovery, proof of something new. But then the lights vanish as if they've been watching you, waiting until you noticed. Then comes the silence, the unshakable feeling that something has followed you home. Some crews report nightmares for weeks after seeing the lights. Others describe phantom glows in their bedrooms at night, flashes of spirals in the corners of their vision. One diver swore he heard knocking on his window, faint but deliberate, for nights after his return. Officially, the vanishing lights don't exist. They are dismissed, forgotten, explained away. But in private, deep-sea explorers whisper about them, the same way sailors whispered about sea monsters centuries ago. Some believe the lights are the first signs of a civilization hidden in the trenches, vast, ancient, and uninterested in being found. Others think they are hunting tactics designed to lure submersibles closer, the way an anglerfish dangles its glow. And then there's the darkest theory of all, that the ocean is not empty but occupied. And the lights are a warning system, marking the intruders who dare to trespass where they should not. The vanishing lights are not recorded on film. They leave no proof, no trace, only the shaken words of those who saw them. But sometimes words are enough. Sometimes silence is louder than evidence. The ocean is full of lights. Some are fish, some are squid, some are drifting jellyfish. But some are patterns. Signal, messages. They appear when we look too long into the abyss. And they vanish the second we get too close. Maybe they are warnings. Maybe they are lures. Or maybe they are simply the ocean's way of reminding us that in its deepest places, we are trespassers. And sometimes when you trespass, the lights go out because something in the dark is watching you back. I've always told myself the ocean is just another frontier, no different from space. Cold, silent, mysterious, yes, but explainable given enough science. That was before the wreck. Before I realized that some things lying in the dark weren't meant to be found. We launched at dawn. Our submersible, the Calypso, was designed for wreck dives, equipped with sonar, high-beam floodlights, and robotic arms for artifact retrieval. Our target was a World War II submarine that had gone down in the Atlantic, 12,000 feet beneath the surface. I remember feeling excited. This wreck hadn't been explored before, not properly. No divers, no salvage, just us. The deeper we went, the more the ocean pressed against us. At 8,000 feet, you stop thinking of it as water. It feels like the weight of a mountain pressing down. The only thing between you and instant death is a steel shell. The sonar pinged. A shape was waiting for us in the dark. The wreck. When we reached the seabed, the sub's lights cut through the blackness, and there it was. The submarine lay tilted on its side, its hull split by what must have been a violent explosion. Rust dripped like blood from torn metal. The seabed around it was littered with debris, twisted pipes, jagged panels, what looked like bones scattered half buried in silt. But what struck me most wasn't the destruction. It was the movement. The wreck shifted. At first, I thought it was my eyes playing tricks. A piece of hull seemed to expand slightly, like a lung inhaling. A panel flexed outward, then eased back. The whole wreck shuddered faintly in a rhythm. I didn't say anything to the others at first. I just kept staring, my mouth dry. A dead submarine doesn't move. It doesn't breathe. "Do you hear that?" the pilot whispered. I strained my ears. At first, all I heard was the low hum of our engines. Then it came deep and guttural, a sound of metal under strain, but not random. It rose and fell slow and steady. The wreck was groaning. The others brushed it off as the shifting of corroded steel under pressure. But I couldn't shake the feeling. It didn't sound like random stress. It sounded like a heartbeat. And when our floodlights swept across the submarine's broken hull, I swear I saw the jagged metal pulse, just slightly, as though blood still ran through its veins. We sent the ROV inside. Its camera feed flickered across our screens, rusted walls, collapsed bulkheads, silt hanging like smoke in the still water. Then something strained. The camera caught a narrow passageway, and as the ROV drifted closer, the walls seemed moist. Not just rusted metal, but slick, almost organic. Patches of hull looked like scar tissue. The lights glinted off surfaces that resembled muscle fiber, stretching and retracting. "Faulty camera," one of the crew muttered. But I leaned closer to the screen, my stomach churning. That wasn't a glitch. The wreck wasn't just collapsing. It was changing, growing, and then the feed cut out. Static. The ROV was gone. We should have turned back. Any sane crew would have logged technical failure and surfaced. But greed runs deep in this business. A lost WWII submarine meant artifacts, salvage rights, maybe even gold. The captain ordered us closer. That's when the voices started. Through the static of our comms, faint at first, then stronger whispers. Not in English, not in any language I knew. Low, broken syllables stretched and distorted, as if carried through waterlogged lungs. One of the crew swore he heard his name. Another said it sounded like Morse code, tapping from inside the hull. I didn't tell them what I heard, because I knew I hadn't imagined it. I heard screaming, muffled, distant, like men drowning over and over again. We maneuvered closer, our lights sweeping the wreck's bow. That's when we saw it, one of the hatches, open and moving. The hatch door creaked, slowly opening wider, then closing again. Not with the current, not drifting, it was deliberate, rhythmic. Like a mouth opening and closing. "Current," the pilot said, his voice shaking. "Just the current." But I knew currents don't make steel behave like muscle. The wreck wasn't passive. It was inviting us in. I'll never forget what happened next. The lights caught on something inside the torn hull. Not metal, not debris. It was smooth, curved, glossy. It blinked. An eye, enormous, staring back at us from within the wreck. The captain ordered lights off immediately, but it was too late. The entire submarine shifted, a groan rumbling through the water like thunder. The seafloor stirred, silt clouding everything. And then came the pull. Our sub lurched forward, dragged by a current or something stronger. The wreck was sucking us in. Panic took over. Engines roared as the pilot fought against the invisible grip. Our floodlights flickered, and in those flashes, I swear I saw the wreck's hull flexing, bending, curling like the ribs of some colossal beast. The open hatch widened, blackness yawning. Inside, faint glimmers of light moved, like bioluminescent veins. And through it all, the voices grew louder. Cries of men long dead, begging warning, commanding us to enter. The sub groaned. Our depth alarms screamed. Another few seconds and we'd have been swallowed whole. With a final desperate surge, the engines broke free. The pull eased and the wreck receded into the dark, vanishing behind a cloud of silt. Silent, we surfaced hours later, shaken and pale. No one spoke on the way back. Not about the voices, not about the eye. Not about the hatch that opened like a mouth. The official report was dry, clinical, ROV failure. Wreck unstable. Dive aborted. But that's not what happened. What we found wasn't a wreck at all. Not anymore. It was something alive. Or worse, something that had died and refused to stay that way. A machine and a body fused into one. and down there in the dark, it was still waiting. I tell myself we were lucky, that we escaped, but sometimes in the dead of night, I dream of the wreck again. I hear the groaning of its hull, slow and steady, like breathing. I see the hatch yawning open, calling me back. And I wonder, did we really escape, or did it let us go? Because I can't shake the feeling that somewhere in the Atlantic, miles beneath the surface, a submarine is still alive. And it remembers me. I've always been drawn to the ocean. Not the beaches, not the surface waves, but the abyss, the places where sunlight has never touched, where the weight of water could crush a human like a tin can, and silence dominates. Our expedition was supposed to be routine. Map a newly discovered trench in the South Pacific, record hydrothermal vents, and observe unknown deep-sea life. Skeptical, logical scientists, we trusted instruments more than legends. The descent was smooth at first. Bioluminescent plankton glimmered past our viewport like drifting lanterns. Fish with transparent bodies and massive eyes floated lazily. Nothing alarming. And then I heard it. A sound. Not the mechanical hum of our sub, not sonar pings, not the creaking of steel. Something melodic. Haunting. Structured. Almost human, but wrong. The pilot adjusted microphones. The sound seemed to come from below, deep in the trench. Faint at first, then clearer. Resonating through the hull, vibrating through my chest. Something in that melody was alive. Hours passed as we descended further than planned. The melody pulsed with a rhythm, rising and falling, almost calling to us. Then I saw movement. In the corner of the viewport, a long, serpentine shape drifted silently. Its skin shimmered faintly, reflecting our lights like molten glass. No eyes, no mouth, just flowing form. A creature aware of us. Watching. The other crew members laughed nervously. Probably a squid, one said. Too deep for anything else. But I knew better. The shape twisted closer, almost coaxing us toward it. My stomach turned over. We were no longer observers, we were part of its hunting ground. The melody intensified. At first subtle, almost soothing. Then insistent. It crept into my thoughts, threading itself into my memory. One by one, crew members began to chain. The navigator whispered his name repeatedly, staring into the darkness. Another began humming the melody perfectly, though he had no musical training. A third clenched his head, eyes wide, muttering, "It knows my thoughts." I fought against it, grounding myself in logic. But the song was relentless. My heart thumped in time with it. My mind felt tugged, stretched. I realized the creature wasn't just singing, it was manipulating our very perception of reality. We attempted to retreat. Engines roared. The appendage in the distance retracted slightly but remained close, coiling through the water like a ribbon of shad. Then contact. Long, translucent tentacles brushed against the sub. Not violently, lightly, almost tenderly. But each touch distorted our instruments. Pressure sensors went haywire. Floodlights flickered. Hull creaked in ways inconsistent with depth pressure. We were being toyed with. The creature wasn't attacking, it was toying. Studying, luring. Inside the sub, the atmosphere shifted. Shadows appeared in peripheral vision. Faint, watery shapes pressed against the glass. Faces, some human, some distorted, gazed at us. Crew members claimed they saw loved ones who had died. I couldn't shake the feeling that the cabin itself had grown, larger, alive. Controls seemed harder to move, as if resisting our commands. The melody pulsed through the steel walls. We weren't piloting the sub anymore, we were passengers in something alive. The pilot attempted an emergency ascent. Systems flickered violently. Engines groaned, almost straining to comply. I could hear a low thrumming in the hull, almost like a heartbeat, but not ours. Something enormous, alive. Hours or maybe minutes passed. Time lost meaning. The melody began influencing dreams. One crew member, asleep in the control cabin, woke screaming, claiming he had seen the creature rise above the sub, reaching out with hundreds of eyes. Another claimed the water outside had turned into a liquid mirror, reflecting our deepest fears. I felt it myself, a sensation of being drawn toward the creature. My willpower fought against it, but the pull was hypnotic. I imagined opening the hatch and letting the melody carry me into the abyss. We argued. Rational minds battled instinct. But instinct was winning. It revealed itself slowly. Not fully, but in glimpses. A glimmer of phosphorescent patterns along its body, forming shapes that resembled human hands, faces, and long-forgotten symbols. The melody carried meaning. Commands, warnings, invitation. One crew member tried to shine the floodlights directly on the creature. It recoiled not in fear, but in understanding. The lights seemed to anger it, or maybe annoy it. Almost as if it had a personality, a consciousness beyond our comprehension. It was old, ancient, patient, and it knew we would come. We attempted to ascend desperately. Engines strained. Floodlights flickered. The appendages reached again, brushing against the sub, caressing it, guiding us toward death or revelation, I couldn't tell. At one point, the melody stopped. Absolute silence. But in that silence, I felt more fear than in the loudest moments. The abyss itself seemed to be holding its breath. Then suddenly the song resumed. Faster, louder, driving us upward. We broke the pull finally, surfacing into normal water. Sunlight, breathable air, weightlessness. Everything returned to normal. Almost. Back on deck, the melody lingered. A ghost in our minds. Crew members woke at night humming unknowable notes. Nightmares haunted all of us. Some refused to speak of what they saw. Some began keeping journals obsessively, recording every detail. The expedition was deemed a success. We reported no anomalies, but we all knew better. The trench had a resident, a siren not of myth but of flesh, bone, and water. Waiting, patient, intelligent, and one day if anyone returns, it will be ready. The ocean is full of lightless creatures, things that think, that feel, that sing. Some call it bioluminescence. I call it a song older than humanity, older than memory. And if you hear it calling from the deep, do not answer. Because it will take you and your mind and leave nothing but the sound of your own screams to echo in the abyss.